On September 17th of 1990, Jennifer Lewis was a 9-year-old girl who was excitedly telling anybody who would listen about her upcoming birthday in 4 days. Jennifer Lewis never saw her 10th birthday because later that day, on September 17th of 1990, her burning body was discovered in the Jefferson School grounds in Davenport, Iowa. You're going to hear the testimony shortly today of the individuals who initially were told about a fire on the school grounds. That's going to be Mike Brown, Randall Stender, who testified at that time. He was a janitor at Jefferson School. They had, I believe, a PTA meeting going on. And originally they thought, well, this was just a nuisance fire, a garbage fire kind of thing. And Mr. Stender went down to put out the fire and discovered that, in fact, was a body, a human body. They, of course, summoned the fire department, called 911. You're going to hear that testimony that helps to start establishing timeline, what time they were called. You're going to hear the testimony, and it's going to come from the transcript because Captain Carpenter is deceased. You're going to hear the testimony of Captain Carpenter from the Davenport Fire Department through transcript, who was an arson investigator, was the city fire marshal at the time, who fairly quickly responded to that scene, examined Jennifer and the scene. He testifies that it was his opinion that an accelerant was used to set Jennifer on fire. We'll hear about that. An accelerant was used, it was poured upon her body. It was poured significantly or extensively in her genital area, pelvic region, and a trailer, what he calls a trailer of gas back to the road about 7 feet away so that the individual could light the trailer on fire and go to the body. He's going to testify again based on his, basically, the type of burning and the smell that he believed that gasoline was used. He also took samples from the area from underneath Jennifer, and those samples did indeed verify through analysis the gasoline was used. As kind of an aside on that, you're going to also hear the testimony of Paul Bush from the Iowa Department of Criminal Investigations Laboratory, and he's going to testify regarding examinations of evidence or samples that were attempted to be taken from Jennifer at her autopsy, and it's called a sexual assault kit as part of that. Paul Bush is going to testify that he examined those samples, and actually what they're looking for is any type of seminal fluid in her vagina or her rectum, and that there was no seminal fluid detected. Seminal fluid can be bodily fluids, blood, saliva, semen, and there were none recovered. And he'll testify that in fact fire could or would or could destroy those type of samples. So there are no type of samples that at that time they did, and I think Mr. Hallbaker referred to it, serology testing on those samples. They did not, that predates the Iowa Department of Criminal Investigations doing DNA, or having the ability to do DNA. That was just kind of on the eve of a DNA analysis. But it wouldn't have made any difference because there was nothing there. Again, the fire could explain that. Before I talk about the evidence, I want to just mention something and talk a little bit about it in voir dire, and that is that oftentimes we try to put together, or we can't put together what occurred or have an idea what occurred based on a chain of facts and circumstances. And that, in fact, is what circumstantial evidence is. It's kind of common sense to put together a chain of facts and circumstances to reach a conclusion of what occurred. And you're going to be told, you're going to be instructed that circumstantial evidence is...
Mr. Walton, would you make sure that you don't argue and just state what the evidence will show?
Thank you. I was just wanted to explain that by analogy. I don't think I'm arguing that anything necessarily.
All right, go ahead.
Thank you. So circumstantial evidence and direct evidence are equal under the law. And I just, as I say, I want to use an analogy to kind of explain what those things mean. So direct evidence is something observed by a person directly.
Same objection, Your Honor. This should be what the evidence is.
You're getting close. I mean, I think you can certainly say some people are going to directly testify, and they can tell you what they heard or saw, and the jury can put together the puzzle. But at this point, I don't think we can explain jury instructions or go much further than that or make an argument.
And not allowed to explain what the law is by analogy to other things.
Right.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, the discovery of Jennifer begins a massive, multi-state investigation. You're going to hear the testimony again from the transcript of the forensic pathologist, Dr. Peter Stevens, who again is deceased now. Dr. Stevens testifies that Jennifer's cause of death was manual strangulation. He also testifies that Jennifer suffered blunt force injuries to her pelvic organs and rectum. Injuries, he testifies, that can only be caused by the insertion of something into Jennifer. And so this investigation begins. And you're going to hear the testimony of, at that time, Lieutenant Don Schaefer. He was the commander of the Detective Bureau of the Davenport Police Department. He responded to the scene. He happened to be at the station that night and responded to the scene. After Jennifer was a resident in Rock Island, and I'm just going to kind of stop there and explain sort of the geography of what we're talking about for those of you who may not be familiar with the area. So what we call the Quad Cities, and we're mostly going to be talking about two of them. Davenport is actually to the north of Rock Island, Illinois. The river in this area runs east and west. It's the big kind of bend around the river in Iowa. And Jennifer was a resident of Rock Island, Illinois, in the area of 11th Street and 7th Avenue. I'm going to talk a little bit about that night in a minute, but Jennifer, at about 6:45, left her home, and she was supposed to be home, or normally the rule was home, she would be home when the street lights came on. When the street lights came on September 17th, 1990, Jennifer did not return home. At that time, her mother, Sherry Glenn, and her stepfather, Joe Glenn, began searching for her. And they looked for her about an hour, I believe. They went to kind of the usual places she might be. And at some point, they called 911. So this was the Glenn's residence. Jefferson School was about 6 minutes away, fairly close from Davenport, Iowa, across the bridge. And Jefferson School is in the central kind of west area of Davenport. Another residence that we'll be referring to is the Hillside Inn. That's where Stanley Liggins lived. Also close to the Glenn residence, within a couple of blocks, is Mac's liquor store. And we'll be referring that too. But I just want to kind of give you an idea of the areas that we're talking about. When the missing person, when Rock Island police started looking for Jennifer, they put out a missing persons, they put out a description of Jennifer, and one of those descriptions was she had a protruding teeth, front teeth, two protruding front teeth. You'll see a picture of Jennifer with a gap. And so Detective Schaefer, Lieutenant Schaefer, at the scene, was allowed to very carefully observe the body. They could observe from the face immediately that we had a young girl with protruding teeth and a gap. And so it was fairly certain at that time that it was Jennifer Lewis. And that's why this became a multi-state investigation, because you have a girl missing in Rock Island, Illinois, the body found in Davenport, Iowa, and so those agencies worked together. Other agencies came in, the FBI came in, some of the smaller towns in that area had some involvement. And it was Lieutenant Schaefer's job. It was decided fairly quickly that Davenport Police Department, this would be their case, and it was Lieutenant Schaefer's job to coordinate all these agencies, try and coordinate all these officers searching for evidence, because in a case like this, he'll testify, it's kind of all hands on deck. He had access to as many police officers as he needed. They teamed Davenport officers with Rock Island officers, and they began this investigation. What Detective Schaefer is going to testify about is that these types of investigations are done by a process of elimination and not by selection. Okay? That's different than most TV shows. Most TV shows, they go right for somebody, and that's what they do because they don't have knowledge. But that's not how it works. And so what Detective Schaefer is going to testify is they start looking for Jennifer's last hours. And they start looking at who crossed paths with Jennifer within that past. Where do those paths separate? Where do they cross? Where can you verify that that person separated and did not come back? And that's the sort of thing they're looking for. And as they investigated this, one of the things that came up was the connection between Stanley Liggins and Jennifer Lewis. Mr. Liggins was an acquaintance of Jennifer's parents, Joe and Sherry Glenn. And Jennifer and Stanley's paths cross. It begins at about 6 p.m. on September 17th. And that's when Mr. Liggins comes to the Glen residence. And you're going to hear testimony of at least two women from the neighborhood. One was Mary Allen Watson. And she is going to testify that she knew Jennifer. In fact, Jennifer was, one of those kids that hang out at her house or came over to play with her children. Mary Allen was one of those people that Jennifer was telling about her birthday coming up. And she knew Jennifer, and Jennifer had been at her house that day. And while Jennifer was out in the area, Mary Allen Watson will testify that a red car drove up. And Jennifer went to that car and was speaking to the driver of that vehicle. Mary Watson did not see who the driver was. She did identify the car. And the car, was a little red four-door Peugeot. And that's an important piece of evidence in this case because this Peugeot was a very distinct car. The little foreign car is kind of a maroon color, but it's got very distinctive taillights, and you're going to see that. That is going to be part of the evidence in this case. So she sees Jennifer. She later sees a picture of that car, and that car is, in fact, the car Mr. Liggins was driving that day. It's pretty much without dispute. So she sees her talking to that vehicle. The other witness, Diane Pemberton, also saw Jennifer Lewis, also knew Jennifer Lewis, and they're on the same, Mary Ann Watson and Diane Pemberton live on the same block on 6th Street, Rock Island, so it's about a block away from the Glens. Diane Pemberton also sees Jennifer talking to this vehicle. She later identifies it as the same vehicle, the Peugeot that Mr. Liggins was driving. She also could identify the driver and later identified that driver of that vehicle as Mr. Liggins. At some point then in that 6 o'clock range, 6 to 6:45, and Jennifer at the time she's talking to that vehicle had her bicycle. And so we know she went back home to the Glens because she was there with her bicycle. And Mr. Liggins also came over to the Glen residence. And they were there. There were other individuals there at that time. And while they were there, Mr. Liggins asked Jennifer if she would go buy him some gum. And Jennifer asked her mother, Sherry, if she could take the money that Mr. Liggins gave her, it was $1, to go to the store to buy some gum. And she was given the permission to do that, and Jennifer left on foot to go buy gum at Max Liquor, kind of not really a small store. Also sold liquor, but also sold other items. And so Jennifer went a couple blocks away on foot to Max Liquor. Sometime shortly thereafter, Mr. Liggins also leaves the Glen residence. You're going to hear the testimony of a man named Antonio Holmes. And Antonio Holmes is going to testify that he went to Max Liquor to buy some beer on that night. And as he was going into the store, into Max Liquor, he saw a male black standing outside the store, and he has identified that individual as Stanley Liggins. When he went into the store, he actually went to buy his beer. As he's standing at the cash register, he's standing behind a little girl buying gum. You're going to hear the testimony of the proprietor of that liquor store, Charlotte McCrae. Charlotte McCrae is going to testify that about 6:45 that day, Jennifer Lewis was there. She also knew Jennifer. Jennifer was there. She describes the dress that Jennifer was wearing. knew Jennifer, and that Jennifer did, in fact, buy some gum from her on that night. And that is the last time Jennifer Lewis was seen alive by anyone other than her killer. So, from there, the evidence takes us to, or the investigation takes us to Davenport, Iowa, and the area where Jennifer was found. And you're going to hear the testimony to sort of set a timeline, if you will, of some events over at Davenport now. And you're going to hear the testimony of Lloyd Eston. In fact, was, I believe, fairly elderly at that time, and has since passed away through transcripts. Mr. Eston will testify that he was driving in the area of Jefferson School at that time, and it's a fairly remote area. It's in a town that's behind the school. And he was driving by, it's actually 12th Street in Davenport, and he saw a car stopped on the side of the road. There was an individual standing outside the car in the back with the trunk open. He was standing in front of the license plates. He did not, he said it's a man. He did not make any further identification than that. But there was a man standing behind the car with the trunk open. Mr. Eston also noted the uniqueness of that vehicle, especially the tail lights. And Mr. Eston has subsequently identified, again, Mr. Liggins' Peugeot as the vehicle he thinks he saw with the individual at Jefferson School standing behind the car with the trunk open. That's approximately 8:15, 8:30, he thought. You're going to hear, and no fire. No fire in that area. You're going to hear the testimony of Christine Olson. Christine Olson was also driving that area. She was driving about a block north, going, I don't know which direction, about a block north. Looked in the area of Jefferson School and saw a fire at that time. She thinks it was about 8:16. She thinks it was before 8:30 because she was trying to get home to watch a specific show. And so between the time Lloyd Eston was there and no fire, minutes later, a witness sees a fire. And you're also going to hear the testimony of Wanda Hughes, who was in a house that faces, but anyway, a window faces towards Jefferson School, and the 12th Street actually takes like a bend and goes to a stop sign. Wanda Hughes is going to testify that she too saw that vehicle, the unique headlight, unique tail light, the vehicle matching that of Mr. Liggins, stopped at that stop sign, and at the same time she saw a fire where Jennifer was subsequently discussed. As they investigate this matter and they look to Stanley Liggins, they did go where Mr. Liggins lived. It's called the Hillside Inn, a hotel in Rock Island. And talked to Mr. Liggins. He was cooperative. He allowed them to search the Peugeot. You can hear testimony that those that, at least one of the individuals that searched the Peugeot believed that it had been washed inside to the extent where it was wet underneath the seats. Mr. Liggins also agreed to be interviewed. In that interview, Mr. Liggins asked if he had seen Jennifer anywhere outside of the Glen home, and he said no. He denied that he had seen Jennifer. When confronted with the fact that there were witnesses that had seen him talking to Jennifer, he changed. He said he had lied because he didn't want to be a suspect in her disappearance. You're going to hear that on that next day, the Peugeot was not parked at the hillside. It was parked across at another apartment building. And a woman, Donna Adkins, whose boyfriend lived in that apartment building, the car happened to be in front of his place, and it was kind of irritant to her because they were trying to move him and it was in the way. She will testify that when she walked by the car had a gas can in it, in the back seat, and that it smelled strongly, the car smelled strongly of gasoline. When asked about the gasoline can, Mr. Liggins indicated that he had helped a woman approximately 4 months before who were out of gas, and he poured the entire contents of that can into their car, and then he always kept the can in the trunk. As Jennifer Lewis, Stanley Liggins, the evidence will show, crossed in a deadly manner for her on September 17th of 1990. And that is why, at the end of this case, we will ask that you return the only true, fair, and just verdict, and that is the verdict finding Stanley Liggins guilty of murder in the first degree. Thank you.